So, all right, and we'll kick it off. Finishes. So Ed's going to lead off. What we'll try to do is, kind of touch base on, different common finishes. Don't have quite as many examples as I think maybe 3 or 4 years ago we did one, and we tried to line up like everything we could find from epoxy and super glue to oil finishes and polys and stuff like that. This will be a little more limited in variation, but hopefully you'll be able to pick something up. Like I said, we'll have 3 different samples on the table for the wood exchange. So if there's something you want to try, and actually, you know what? I will just put 6 out for the wood exchange, but the bottles cost 50 cents, and there's about $1.25 worth of varnish in every bottle. So if there's something you want to try, we'll just sell you a bottle for $2, and that way you don't have to buy like a $15 or like that Waterlux is like over $30 now, I think, for a quart. $35, which is like, if I don't like it, why do I want to spend that much? But I think it's a good deal. Maybe next month, if I can figure out how to get from a paint can into those little tiny bottles, I'll try to get some of that shine juice. So that's BLO, shellac, and alcohol, because it puts on a nice finish, but it's got a couple little caveats when you use it. And if I get that ready for the next meeting, maybe we could have a quick, 5 or 10 minute showing on the right way to get a good finish with the shine juice.
Do you have a baster?
I don't. Buy one?
It works good for putting stuff in. Anybody tell you how helpful you are? You pick them up at the dollar store.
Yeah. Huh. Thanks, Al. You can go home now.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm out.
Oh. No, but that's actually really good, because I think the ones I remember, you almost get 2 ounces in one of those, can't you? Yeah, that'll be perfect. Cool beans. All right.
Then you put it back in the drawer for your wife.
So I'm gonna turn it over.
So we're talking finishes today, and whether we realize it or not, the first step of finishing a project is the sanding process. Nothing will affect your finish more than not doing a good job on the sanding. Tim had an awesome demo maybe 2 years ago that completely changed the way I do finishing or sanding. How many people like to sand their bowls? I've actually learned to like it. I have learned it's a process, and one of the things that I have struggled with for all this time is slowing down my process on the lathe. You get a nice piece of wood, boy, you want that bowl done. So you rush cutting it, you rush sanding it, you rush finishing it, and now you have this beautiful piece of wood that you've kind of gnarled up. So if you slow down, think about your design, think about your cuts, slow down your cuts, and then really focusing on the sanding, you can get much better results. Tim's process in a nutshell was basically you finish your cuts on the lathe, you have a finished bowl or a nice clean surface to start with, and now you're going to take sandpaper and you want to erase the previous lines. So the first grit of sandpaper, I usually use 80. I'm not too proud to say that. I start low as possible, and I'm starting to sand, and my purpose of sanding with the 80 is to get rid of the tool cuts. And then you go to 120. The purpose of the 120 is to get rid of the 80. And down the line you go. You're always trying to remove the previous scratches. And Tim's demo was kind of eye-opening for me, is how you do that is by changing the direction. Because if you sand with the grain with 80, and then you take 120 and you sand with the grain, you'll never see any 80 cuts that are left. But if you change direction, now you can see, well, I still got vertical cuts, so obviously I must still have some 80s in there, so I need to sand more. And maybe it's a circular cut, not necessarily across the grain. So I have kind of gotten into the habit of, I do 2 passes with every sandpaper grit. I typically, we're talking bowls today, but this would apply to just about anything you do. Typically I run it on the lathe, slow speed. I have a drill with a 2 and a 3-inch pad, and I sand my 80 grit with the pad, with the lathe running slow. Sometimes I just hand turn it. So, you know, I'm not running the lathe, I'm just spinning it by hand. And then I take the paper off the pad, and then I hand go against the direction. And then you can look at the wood. I have a flashlight that I use to shine if I'm looking for those lines. And when you're happy, then you move on to the next one, you repeat, right on down the line. What that gives you is the finish will absorb differently into the wood. So we have a couple of examples here, and we'll pass these out. Here is Tim brought in some 100 grit, 180, 240, and just scraped. And this is shellac and lacquer. And if you look at it, you kind of have to put it in the light to kind of see what we're talking about. But you can see the scrapes, you can see the swirls, and you can see how the finish applied differently to the different scrapes and swirls.
And just one added piece is that within each grit, if you hold your disc, you know, whether you're sanding on the top versus the side, the angle, you'll get vertical or horizontal swirls. And so I did both of those. So within each square, left you'll see I tried to sand it with the grain, and then right next to it I went across the grain, so you can see the difference in just the direction, the impact on the direction. And then the hand scrape is basically what I did. I ran through the planer so there's no sandpaper marks. And the hand scraper, you ever see the little metal black scrapers? So then I hit it with that, so it, you know, pretty much there's like no marks on the wood, and it gives you something to compare it to.
This is the same thing, same grits, same thing, but with tung oil and Danish oil. And then I did board with wipe on poly, and I did a little different than Tim. I sanded the whole thing at 80, and then I sanded just these last 2 sections in 120, and then this last section in 220. So it's kind of the progression. It's a little harder to see on this one, but you definitely can see the cuts from on the 80, and it kind of moves into the 120, and then by the time it gets to 220, it's better. This was finished with wipe on poly. And then this is the same thing with BLO, which is kind of my go-to finish now. And what I wanted to show everybody with this BLO is, I think this BLO hides those marks much better. Couple of notes. You can't speed up this process. There's no way to speed this up. You have to go through the steps. You have to complete the first one as well as you can before you move to the second one, because if you cheat and you go too fast, you'll leave something behind. And you also have to learn to be light. If you sand heavy, you'll put deeper scratches in, which will cost you down the road to get more and more of the other sandpaper grits to get that scratch out. Kind of a rule of thumb is I always use just my hand, and if it gets too hot on my fingers, I stop, because you're putting too much pressure on. Yeah, Pete.
Do you wipe the sawdust out between grits?
I typically wipe the early stuff off often. So when I do my 80, I'll wipe it off. I usually just use like a a wet rag or a damp rag to wipe it off, and then sand to the next grit. You don't want it so wet that the wood itself gets wet, but just damp enough to kind of clean it out. And then I do use sanding sealer, which is towards the end of my grits. I'll put a coat of sanding sealer on. And what that does is kind of show you what you've missed. Shows you the lines that aren't quite perfect, the spots where you may have a scratch that you missed, and then how the wood is going to take your finish. And then my final step is to kind of sand off the sanding sealer. Any other questions? All right. Okay, so
Might as well just do that.
sure, you just want to jump in. So again, my current, I think what happens is we find a finish that we like, and then we work with that finish, and we develop this relationship with this product, and we become the BLO guy, or the wipe on poly guy, or I always use Danish oil guy. And while I use other finishes for other things, I have just become more comfortable with my boiled linseed oil. My process for boiled linseed oil is about a 9-day finishing process. So I typically will finish sanding my bowl, and I will coat the whole bowl very heavy with boiled linseed oil. And then I'll let it soak, and I'll put stuff away, and I'll clean something up, and I'll sweep the shop, and I'll do something else. And after about 15, 20 minutes, I wipe whatever's left off the bowl. And then I have found that you really need to leave it sit for a couple of days. And what happens is that oil soaks into the bowl, and then it begins hardening. And I don't want to say it cures, but it does firm up quite a bit. And then 3 days later, I'll just take a little bit of boiled linseed oil on a rag or a paper towel, and I'll wipe that whole bowl off again. And again, set it aside, let it cure for a couple, 3 days. And you can see, if you watch the bowl during those 3 days, you'll see how it becomes dull. So the board that's being passed around, that's 3 coats over 9 days. And you can see how dull the finish is. And yet, if I took that piece of wood and put it on a buffer, it would buff up to a nice shine. I have 2 bowls in the gallery. Thank you. Wow. I have 2 bowls in the gallery, and that's all that's on those 2 bowls is boiled linseed oil. And the outside has been buffed and are very shiny. But the inside, I still haven't gotten the beetle system to work right for me for the inside, so that's something I need to work on.
When you just proved the adage, 95% is prep,
Yes,
5% is finish.
yes, and exactly. So you have to start with good tool cuts on the bowl, good tool cuts, sharp tools. Move into your sanding. You have to go through the steps. You can't cheat. You can't jump. And so as you move through all these finishing, couple of days of letting it dry, I have learned, or I'm trying to learn to slow down, all right? Because my goal is a nice product, not a finished bowl today. So that's my 2 cents worth, I guess. Any questions?
I've got one.
Yeah.
You must give me, but I do wooden wares, right? So everything I use, everything I do, the end result has to be food state. So is BLO food state? I don't know. I've never used them.
So that's an ongoing question in every woodworker's discussion group that you'll ever come across. And the best answer I've heard is virtually every finish is food safe if given enough time to cure. There are some exceptions, right? But I mean, for the most part, if you let it cure and harden, it's going to be food safe. That doesn't mean that you could pour hot coffee in my bowl and drink it and not expect to have some bitter taste from whatever's in there. Food safe to me is, you could put fruit in it and eat it. Maybe you could put crackers or chips in it and eat it. When you're dealing with liquids, especially hot liquids, now to me, that's a completely different conversation. So, and it's also a completely different conversation based on the wood. So to try to answer a question like that is, you have to know all the variables. BLO is food safe if applied correctly and allowed to cure. You have to let it off gas and you have to let it harden.
And there's been some, like if you're a painter, you ever like paint a wall and then if you put your picture on it, like 3 or 4 days later, the paint will stick to the corners of the picture when you pull it off the wall. You could even wait 90 days, and if you put something a little heavier on the wall, when you pull that off, it will pull the paint off. So paint alone really cures probably like 90 days to 120 based on how thick it was. The finishes that we put on our bowls are quite similar. To really cure and have all of the thinner that's in there, or the reaction that occurs with the components of the finish, it's going to take a little longer than you think. That's why the people that do a lot of like spoons, bowls, cutting boards, they like the walnut oil because you can eat it right away. You get a little walnut oil in you, it's no big deal. Mineral oil, it's basically medicine, right? Wax, beeswax, stuff like that. So those are, the nice part about those is that there's no cure time. And then most of the other finishes, you just gotta wait till they're dry. Because linseed oil is made out of linseeds, which it's a natural item. And except, mineral spirits or whatever is in there as a cutter is something that you don't want to ingest. So.
Boiled doesn't mean it's been boiled in a pot and boiled. Boiled means there's a chemical additive to it in order to allow it to cure or allow it to harden faster.
And Ed was talking a little bit about poly. I'll pass this around too. So this is just a bowl that was finished with white on poly. 3 coats. Between the coats, I don't sand between every coat, but I'll always sand before the last coat. So you can pick up your own habits, but I'll go just before the last coat. I do just 600 grit just to knock off the nips, and I applied another one. Half of this bowl is buffed, half isn't. So you can kind of see it's all labeled. It'll be pretty obvious. But I'll give you an idea. And poly, because, this wasn't fully cured, so when I buffed it, you get a little bit of heat effect on it, and it melts just a little bit. So if you look really close, you'll see that the heat from the buffing wheel actually morphed the finish just a little bit. Not easy to see, but I normally would wait a lot longer to buff it.
Ed, on your boiled linseed,
Yeah.
does it change the color if you're using a light wood?
It does darken the wood. 100% the board. So this is a cherry piece of wood. You can see the back is unfinished. And it's pretty light. And this is 3 coats and it darkens it. But I also think it highlights the grain of the wood and the beauty of the wood. And I think virtually any finish you use is going to do that. I've never had it yellow, right? Which is the one thing I don't want to do. All right, any other questions? Let's give a big hand for Lynn for stepping up today.
Thanks, guys. Is that loud? It feels loud. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about milk paint. I'm going to start with some pictures. Actually, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the milk paint first. It is, you would think it was milk, but it's actually made of casein, which is the protein that's in milk. That's where the name came from. Casein is also used in glue, a lot of wood glue. So that's where the property comes, where it just stays very nicely on your bowl, not really peeling off because it is a glue. So picture-wise, I just wanted to show you, because I am not, by far not the queen of milk paint, but there are some people that are pretty good at it. This is Jeff Hornig. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that. It's the walnut log. I saw this a couple of weeks ago, and usually when you think milk paint, you're kind of thinking more of the distressed or more earthy tones, and I thought these were pretty vibrant colors that he had. So I emailed him, and he replied kindly and gave us a 10% discount on any purchase. Just to let you know, he's also part of Hampshire Sheen. He also sells Hampshire Sheen products, so I thought that was very nice of him. Just use the code Bay Lake for the next 2 weeks, and you'll get a 10% discount from him. So I basically was just asking how many coats, which this is just 2 coats, and he did finish with tung oil. You go to the next. Very popular nowadays is just doing the outside rim of the bowl, which is what he did. I personally think the inside is just gorgeous. I don't know why you would paint the outside of this. I usually go for very plain wood. Okay. This one is Kim Tippin. The reason I'm using this as an example is first, she was the first one to show me. I watched a video on her doing this bowl. And I just thought it's kind of interesting. You can do what you want with this. It's showing the brush marks on it, and it actually looks pretty good. So that's why I picked this one. And like I said, lots of options. This is a little more rustic.
Who did that?
Oh, I don't know. That's Pinterest. Happy
Good
Pinterest
job.
Day.
That was a good job.
The next one is the more, looking much more worn, which is what milk paint is known for. I'm actually not particularly fond of this. I like it better when it's cleaner and a little more modern. This reminds me a little bit of Tim's stuff that he does, but this would be the two-tone. The next couple are more of a two-tone where you put the base coat on, then the base would have been white, then you paint the blue over, and then you sand back on the ridges, the high ridges, and then you come back to your white. And then the next, a little more modern, very small. And these are all Pinterest again. Next one, again with the two tones, black and green, and then sanding back on one of them. And then the last couple pictures are Kimberly Winkle, which is what you were talking about with the stools. She also, what was it, in October, they had something with AAW, and they had it out, the videos for 3 months after you paid to watch this, and of course, it went away before I could watch it the second time to do this demo, but Kim Winkle is, I think, in the board of AAW, and she just does some beautiful work with these stools. Her finish, though, I believe, like I said, I couldn't clarify because I couldn't watch it again, but I believe she said that her finish on the top of the milk paint is shellac, which brings all that shine. And then the last one is another one of her stools. A little distressed, and just very, very nice. So, options on your milk paint. I did a sample board also. It starts out with just plain milk paint. I started out, on this side with just plain milk paint. And then milk paint is a very porous. So you do have to finish it. You have to put something on it. It's like, if you don't finish it, if you do any kind of water stain, anything like that would show up on this. So what they suggest, I use the Milk Paint Company for all my colors. They usually suggest the tung oil. They have one. This is half and half. It's citrus and it smells fabulous, truly. It's half tung oil and half of the citrus base. So that's what I put on these. So regular milk paint, no sanding, no buffing, with just the tung oil. This is just sanded. I don't know why anybody would want to do it, but the next one is sanded and buffed with tung oil, and then sanded and buffed with wax. So that's just the things you can tell the color starts changing on it once you start buffing and sanding. And the other thing I brought was here he is. A little distressed, one of my gnomes. God help us all with the gnomes. A little distressed gnome on the top. I just slap on color. I wasn't doing the two-tone on this. I just slapped on a bunch of color. The distress on it, I just took a nail and laid it sideways on it and hit it with a hammer. So that's the kind of distress on this. And then this is the two-tone also. My base coat was purple, and then I put white on top, and I had a bunch of different things that I did. This one is also the screw. These are just lines that I had put in. And then I sanded off the top coat. This also shows what you can do going down. I didn't want to go down to the wood, but it does. And so it's kind of a mistake on my part, and it's very easy to do. And that's the one thing you want to make sure when you're doing something like this, that the coats are thick so that you don't go down. If you don't want to go down to the wood, that you don't go down to the wood because you have thick coats. I'm not, and the reason for that is I'm not much of the two-tone, the two coats. I personally like these little guys better where you just kind of, okay. Where you kind of wet blend it, just taking some different colors. This is 3 different colors of the purple, the blue, and the gray, and I just kind of wet blend them together.
So when you blend them, you're doing that wet, or are you doing it on the bowl when you blend it? You know what I mean? How do you blend them?
I just have the bowl on the lathe, and then I have a paintbrush and turn the lathe on very slow and just put it on and blend.
So you're overlapping
Yep.
colors.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Bingo. So let's talk about how to put it together. The milk paint company has, and we've talked about it before, they still have that sale going on, which is 3 to 5 for the price, but it gives you free shipping, which is nice. Within the last month, though, just to let you know, the price went up from $3.50 to $4.50 for the sample sizes. $1. Holy cow.
Yeah.
So I'm going to use black, my favorite color, or non-color. Just give me 1 second here.
You're gonna need some money, yeah. Sorry.
No, I wanted to use the same one because otherwise it doesn't work.
How do you prep your wood?
This stuff is, yeah, I just sanded it, I think 240.
Oh, so you go all over.
Yeah. Which you're going to resand again, so. So I don't use a lot. Obviously, you don't need a lot. On this one, I'm just doing a half a teaspoon. Usually what I do is go a little higher than what I'm doing with the water because I like my milk paint a little on the thicker side. They say that they want it like cream thick. I go a little, like, mine is more like a clotted cream. Now I wanted to show this also.
So it's a powder, it comes as a powder?
It comes as a powder form and then you add water to it, so it is water-based. When you start mixing it, you can see that it's like oil and water. It just doesn't want to go together. But if you continually mix it, suddenly you'll see the wetness come out. And then it comes together. But that first minute is just difficult. It just doesn't want to come together. I should have made another batch of this, actually.
Is it 1-to-1?
It's 1-to-1 ratio, yeah. I usually, because I do more of the powder, I just add by drop then, if it's not coming together. Musical interlude for a moment here.
Nobody wants Tim to sing.
Yeah. My wife can't tell the difference between my singing and my snoring.
See, and you can tell it's starting. I don't know what there. Just a little. There it is. See, this is a little bit too thick, a little cloddy there. So I just add a few more drops.
You like it thicker because?
It just goes on nicer. It's more of a wash, the thinner you get. And I like that solid color like Jeff had done.
The thinner stuff doesn't leave green or green?
Yeah, I would think so, yeah. If you want your wood. Okay, so.
How long in between coats if you're gonna do 2 or 3 coats?
It depends on how thick you go, but usually 20 to 30 minutes. It's a really fast drying, really nice paint for that reason. Paintbrush, I am an aficionado of the dollar store. Hallelujah, get your stuff there. My paintbrushes are always usually from dollar store. It's cheap. I don't need anything huge with this because it's going to be sanded down again eventually. If you're doing something large, where'd it go? Oh, it's not plugged in? Oh, yeah. Poink. It's that one, right?
We got the other switch here, right? Or no?
Oh, I just did, and it worked. Thanks, Pete. So you want to go slow, obviously, when you're doing this. Or you can just, and a lot of times I just start kind of clotting it on. And as I was saying, if you're doing something large, you can use a foam brush is always nice.
And these powermatics only go down to about 50, right? You don't go real slow.
And then I just kind of make sure everything is covered. Again, I do one thick coat, and then we'll probably flop on another thicker coat. But that's it.
When you mix it, how long can a mixed batch last? Could you cover it and use it the next day, or is it pretty much dry?
1 to 2 days. As long as you cover it, it should last a couple days. They don't recommend holding on to it for too much longer after that.
Okay.
And then, by the miracle, it dried.
So if it dries through, could you add more water and milk paint and
You mean after 2 days?
Yeah.
I don't think they recommend that. I don't think it's a matter of adding water. I actually, I don't know.
I think because it is that glue base.
Yeah.
I think it's not reversible, which is actually good. Because if it did, and you applied it to a bowl and it got wet, maybe it would run after the fact. Oh, what you need?
My sandpaper. Oh, wait, that's stuck. So this is a dry piece. And you have the sample that's going around. I go in reverse.
The switch right by the on-off.
I learned on this. I don't know what is going on with me today. I love this one. So I go in reverse to basically go the other way, go away from you for the dust. It also is highly recommended, which we don't have a mask today. I'm not putting a mask on. We don't have to. But they recommend that you put on a mask because of all the dust. I just do this to bring down the nibs. You don't have to go hog wild crazy. This is just a 320 Avernet for sandpaper. And then you can feel it. It's all nice and smooth. And then to bring that last shine on it, you go a little bit faster. Thank you. You go a little bit faster, but watch out with the steel wool because obviously it can catch. The other thing that I've read recently is using a paper bag to do this final buffing, which I... This is definitely not centered. It is for art, thank you. You know, I knew all these things to say when I was thinking about doing this, but when you're up here, you forget everything. So it's definitely shinier. And then if, with me, I would end up putting the half and half on after this. Like I said, you want to finish this because it is porous. It'll just soak up anything that hits it. That's it. That's it. That's it.
Yeah, it looks very simple, very nice.
So when you do multiple colors, you leave it wet, right?
Yes,
To blend the colors?
to blend. That's what I do. That's how I do it. I suppose you could let it dry and it would make a more solid line in between them.
So depending on when you sharp contrast or a blended.
Yeah.
Then,
The wet blend, definitely, I pull the colors together to get that like third color with it.
so I talked about the yellow taking 3 days to cure. You said this dries in 20 minutes. Is there any, because there's the glue component, does it cure? Is it ready to go in 20 minutes or does it usually take?
I think that it's still, in the next few days, it's still very easy to come off. I think it's the same thing as what Tim said. It takes a while for it actually to cure. But the actual dry component and to use everything with it, yeah, I think you can do that all right away. But I wouldn't like put some salsa in a milk paint bowl right away.
And there's people that use that like if you had like that one bowl you showed that was distressed, it kind of had carving, and then they sanded it down to the wood on the high spots. They're sanding that like within an hour.
Yeah, yeah.
So I mean, if you wanted to do that type of look, I mean, 20 minutes, like she said, it's dry. If you didn't put it on too thick, you may be able to start sanding already in 15, 20 minutes.
Easy. I mean, you can watch this and see wherever I want this and see how long that takes to dry. It won't be much.
You were saying before that if you thin it down, you have the paint thin enough, will it also show some of the wood grain through?
Correct. It's more of a wash than what I do, which is slap that puppy on, or at least for right here.
Thank you.
So if you want a sharp edge, are you taping it off or?
You can. Yeah, not the queen of milk paint. I haven't done a lot with it, but yeah, it's so adaptable. That's the one thing, and that's why I like it so much. I mean, and the colors they have are so bright, more vibrant than the earth tones that it used to be.
Where are you getting yours from?
The milk paint company.
Yeah, actually, that's good.
Do you want me to toss it around? Because the smell on this is just, for a finish, for a tongue oil finish.
If you smell it more than 30 seconds, you'll need an escort out to your car.
But it's half and half with tongue oil and this citrus, and I don't know what the citrus is, but truly it's the only finish where I'm like, yeah, all right. And again, they call it food safe.
Yeah, very cool. If somebody was interested in some samples, again, don't always get takers on these offers, but I'm going to be ordering some, probably like a half a dozen, and I would be glad to throw some more samples in if you get in touch with me. We can communicate via email. If you want to go out to their site, they have samples of all the colors. So you could just say, oh, I'd like to try a blue. They have like a stone. There was some pretty cool.
There's some here. I mean, and
like
these are,
ceramic, so you could just stress it and it looks like it's kind of a stone. So it was pretty cool. They got some neat options. Oh, look at that.
A
Yeah,
stone
pass that
blue.
around.
I mean, that's obviously not all of them. That's just the ones that I own.
Yeah. So I'm gonna order some if you get in touch with me within the next week. What did you say, like $4.50 now, probably?
$4.50 for one of these sample sizes.
And it goes a long way on our smaller projects.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I'm using a half teaspoon at a time, so I still have yet to go through a jar.
I just want to emphasize, that's a deal. I mean, our $2 bottles here is just a deal compared to the retail price of milk.
So there's sample sizes too, you can get the tongue oil, or
Yes.
you can get some
If
of
you
the,
want to try this tongue oil, and that's how I found that tongue oil, and it's, okay, I shouldn't say delicious, but it is.
It's not recommended you eat it.
Yay,
All right,
I'm done.
thanks, Lynn.
Oh, thank you.
Watch that.
Yeah.
Thanks. All right, actually, I forgot Bill's gonna be up right after me to talk about the velvet oil. So just touching real quick on tongue oil and Danish oil. So I'll let you go. This one will be better. So what I did, just to give you a feel for the differences, is I took two bowls that came from the same tree. They kind of have the same green orientation, and they're very similar wood. And one I finished with Waterlux, and Waterlux is actually tongue oil based, and it's a little bit expensive. It's like, I'm pretty sure it's like 35, could even be more than that now, $35 for a quart. We did have some, actually we got some left in the little sample bottles, and it darkens the wood a little bit, but it goes on real nice. And the reason I'm grouping these two together is I apply them the same way. So I put it on, I don't want to say dripping, because I don't want to see any runs when I'm covering it. I'll just take a rag, I put a little bit in a cup, and then I'll just circular motion, I'll wipe it on the bowl until it won't take any more in, and then I kind of keep moving all the way around it. I'll set it down, I'll wait 2-3 minutes, and you'll notice that on the end grain, it sucks it right in, and then on the side grain, it might still be glossy wet, right? So I will use the same rag without adding any more finish, and I'll just swirl it around on top to re-wet the end grain. I'll do that probably twice. And then after 15 minutes, I wipe it dry, and I'll let it sit overnight and put another coat on. I do the same thing with Waterlux, with the tongue oil, as I do with the Danish oil. The difference is you will build a little more finish with tongue oil. So if you saw that one sample go around, yeah, this one.
Whoa.
So I don't know if you noticed this, but I handled it the same way on this sample board. They each got 3 coats, and the tongue oil is more glossy. So there is a film that you can feel with the tongue oil, but it's still very minor. It's not real thick. It's not a heavy, like a coating. Tongue oil also is, I'm gonna say it's a little bit softer than like a poly. So you could carve your fingernail into it maybe a little bit easier. Doesn't get quite as hard as a varnish, but it's a very elegant finish, and I like what it does. And that's about it. So you flood it the same way. Again, 3 coats. I joined the Madison Club, and there's 3 or 4 guys on the Madison Club that they only put 1 heavy coat of Danish oil on their projects, and then they'll do the same thing I did. So after 5 minutes, they reapply it, or they just make sure that it gets on the end grain. And then 5 minutes later, they'll just wash it one more time. And then after 15 minutes, they wipe it dry, and they'll let it sit for a couple of days and buff it. And they really like it, and that's all they do. So it doesn't have to be a long, multiple coat process. But I'll pass all 3 of these bowls around. This bowl right here, which is in the gallery, but it was Danish oil on hard maple, and I wanted to show you how smooth you can get it. And even though it soaks in really well, after you buff it, and I got a lot of sanding in on this one, it gets really nice. You can get a really good finish, and it's durable if you want to use it for food. So, any questions on tongue oil or Danish oil?
You built a kiln
Oh,
or dryer?
yeah, and I think we've talked about that also, but it's real simple. I took an old cooler, and I turned it on end so it looks like a little refrigerator. I added a couple blocks to the feet so it stands up straight. And then I put a light bulb. If you go to Fleet Farm or probably Home Depot, it's that kind of light bulb reflector you would use in like a chicken thing. What do they call it? Like an incubator, not an incubator. Yeah, it's like a heat lamp thing. They're only 10, maybe 15 bucks tops, but it's got a heavy cord. It can handle the heat. Usually it's ceramic where it holds the bulb, and then it won't. It's meant to take the heat. But I only put a 40-watt bulb in it, which isn't that hot. I put it in the bottom, and it keeps it. It keeps it at like 80, depending if it's inside or in the garage or in the house, between 85 and 105 degrees. And to regulate the heat, I just have one of those lamp timers, like you put on your lamps when you're on vacation. And the one I have is every tick is 15 minutes. So I go 15 on, 15 off, 15 on, and I just let it run. And it works great. I drop it in there, and the next day, everything's nice and dry. Polyurethane is wonderful because my shop is at 64 degrees. And I left that dish that went around, I left it overnight with wipe on poly, and it was sticky the next day. I put it in my cooler with the light bulb. 2 hours later, I thought it was dry completely. So just that, going from 65 to 85 degrees is a huge difference for curing your finishes. And if you want to kind of speed that up, it works out really well.
How long in the kiln was
Well, it kind of depends, right? So if you put it on thick, like I told you, like if you actually dip the rag into Danish oil for that full 15 minutes, so you flood it, let it sit 5, you flood it again, let it sit 5. It'll take a while for that to dry because that gets way into the end grain. And if you buff it after a week, there's a really good chance that it'll boil and it'll kind of weep and come out of the pores. And again, that's if you get it really soaked. But I would think that if you put it on thinner, a week later, and maybe 2 days in that cooler with the 80 degrees, you're sitting pretty good.
The reason I'm asking is because I'm thinking about doing the same thing with the oil, to maybe try to reduce some of my time.
Oh, it'll at least cut it in half. I feel very confident of that. And you don't want it at much more than 100, 105 degrees, because again, you just want that heat up to kind of accelerate the cure. And most of those cures are, I shouldn't say most of them, but all of the oils, they're cured with heat that occurs when oxygen mixes with the finish. So you know how they always warn you not to put your wet rags out because it's in, spontaneous combustion. So what happens is the oxygen in the air reacts with the chemicals in the finish, and it gets really hot, and that heat is what cures the finish.
Or you just use this for finishing bowls, or do you use it for drying?
I've used it for both, and I think Al, maybe Connor, more than Osterman. Don't you dry a lot of your wood in your refrigerator, don't you?
I can.
Yeah.
I got mine set up with an old refrigerator, round old refrigerator, gutted it all, kept the insulated container, and we put a greenhouse thermometer in it. But AEW had this in one of their magazines, and it tells you where to drill the hole. So if you put green wood in there, you'll actually get wet water out of the bottom. So you'll pull the moisture. And then with a greenhouse thermometer, you can set the temperature you want. Well, you know, and I think it set it at 75 or 80 per week, and turn it up. And we weigh it between, see how we're losing. So it's like, we all lose.
Sure.
It works well.
Yeah. So, and then just for the recording, what he was saying was he uses an old refrigerator. The plans were on AAW's website,
Right.
and he's managing the humidity and the heat with a greenhouse thermostat, and it seems to work out pretty good.
Information if somebody really wants it.
Yeah. Joe.
Around a little bit.
I did the same in an old dishwasher. So my dishwasher died, and I pulled it out, threw it in the workshop, and followed the same kind of recipe and did the 75 watt bulb, but I could dry maybe 10, depending on the size, or 12 bulbs. I rough turn them. I'd throw them in there within 2 weeks. I'd be able to finish turn them.
Nice. And you got bowl racks and everything in there. Yeah. So
Really slick.
Joe used a dishwasher for that, so he ended up with the rack. That's kind of neat.
I made a calendar, set the refrigerator off, so I can take it wherever in the crack, push it out the barn.
Yeah.
Take it to top, I think.
And I know Al's got that little fan in there, so it's you're circulating the air.
Right, I got, the directions said to do that, and I got computer friends from Austin, all of them in there, so they run all the time.
Did his computer burn up yet? Because he doesn't have any fans on it, or?
Oh, I know somebody that jumps the
So you circulate inside the refrigerator?
Correct,
Or do you cycle air from outside in?
The holes that you drill in it, and it tells you how to do that, where to put them. You know, so it draws the air from the bottom and circulates it out, goes through the top.
Okay, so you do
And
both.
the heat flow is what regulates your mercury switch or your greenhouse thermometer.
But I think mostly it's circulating the internal air,
Right.
and then those holes are just to allow a little bit of the humidity to start to siphon off, because you don't want to use it too fast. You don't want to dry it too fast. That's the key.
The first time I did it, I didn't put the bulb in.
Oh, okay.
Puddle on the bottom of the dishwasher, right? So all the moisture that came out had no place to go. And even though it kept drying, I just got a pool on the bottom. So then I went back and reread the directions and realized I needed some.
Yeah, typical guy. And then I went back and read the directions. So, all right. So that's what I had on the Danish oil and the tongue. I'll pass these two around. You can kind of look at them. If you feel the bottom, you can feel one that has more of a build. You know, it's a little, okay, it's got a little more thickness to it. And I don't know if you want to. Yeah.
And then put them on, I think that you took the pictures of that, and probably it's on
Yeah, I did.
the meeting.
It is. So I'm trying to think, Jerry, we would have had we did the shop tours on the Zoom meeting, and it would have been on a slideshow. Do you remember if the slideshow would have been captured on the, I'll look it up. Yeah, and we'll post it. But yeah, you're right, because I think we took a couple photos, like the outside and the inside and stuff like that. And then I'll just pass this one around, so just, be aware that this one I sanded to at least 320, okay? And then I applied my first coat, and then I look for scratches, right? And then I come at it with 400, 600, 800 grit Abernet, and I wet sand it. And so I'll sit here like this, and I rotate it real slow, and I look for little scratches, and then I'll go like this. So I'm using Danish oil as the lubricant with my Abernet as I go around that. And my goal is to get rid of all the scratches. Don't look too hard. But. Okay. Any other questions? We'll turn her over to Bill. And velvet oil.
When I first started, I think we all kind of experienced the same thing. We would sand or put a finish on and try to get finished with the bowl, in a day or two. And I've learned that it takes longer than a day or two. So when I do, first of all, I've been using velvet oil for probably 30 years. When I started, we built our house and I use it on my cabinets. I use it on my floor, actually. And so that's how I kind of got into using velvet oil. And then, I got into woodworking and built furniture and things like that. And I finished it with velvet oil. And
What is velvet oil?
I don't know.
So they don't squeeze velvet?
No, not at all. No. And it's actually made in Neenah, which is,
Oh, really?
yeah. And interestingly, at the last meeting, I was able to get some samples from velvet oil. And I brought them, and all of a sudden there were like 3 or 4 people saying, well, where did you get this? I've always wanted to know where I could get it. And so I thought when I got in a meeting with Tim and Jerry on Tuesday, and they were talking about finish, I thought, oh, well, maybe I can talk a little bit about velvet oil. So I have kind of developed my own process as far as finishing. But again, in order to do this right, you have to sand it, the bowl. And I actually go as high as 400 grit sanding. So all the way from 80 up to 400. And at first I didn't do 400, I did 220 and I'd put velvet oil on. And I thought, this is okay. But all of a sudden I started using 320 and 400, and then I'd put velvet oil on. And the finish was just a nicer finish. And so that's what I do. And then when I finish, I actually do 4 coats and wet sand each coat. So I've actually done 2 coats and I've wet sanded with 600. I'm okay. Yeah. And 1200. And when you put the first coat on, it kind of soaks in. And I wipe it off, and even after that, it'll bleed out a little bit because it hasn't, what do I want to say, cured the pores or. And so after the second coat, it still will bleed out a little bit, even after I've sanded with 1200 grit. And then from 1200, I will do 2000 and then 2500. And I'm not sure if 2500 is gonna, make that big of a difference, but it may give it a little more of a shine. So what I would like to do is just put a little of this on. And one of the nice things about velvet oil is, you just put it on with a rag. And actually, let's see. I don't know how to turn this one on. Push,
The red one out,
pull the red one out.
bottom dial is blue.
Okay. Oh, well, okay.
It's still in reverse.
Yeah, it is. I want to
So
change
turn it
that.
off,
Stop it.
Yeah,
and then
Switch is
flip-
right above the speed.
that one, okay. Yeah. All right. And since I put 2 coats on already, it should not bleed anymore once I'm finished with it.
So the raw wood, you're sanding to what grit?
Either 320 or 400.
Okay,
Yep.
all right.
Yep.
And you don't seal it, you just put the oil right on it.
Yep. All right. What I like to do is I really like to just let it sit for a while. And then after probably 5 minutes or so, then I'll sand. But I'm going to sand with 1200. And when I sand with 1200, there's going to be kind of a slurry on it. And I'll take a rag and get that off. And then I'll do the 2000. And there'll be a little bit of a slurry even with the 2000. And I will use the rag again.
What are some of the benefits of velvet oil?
I think, first of all, it's easy to apply. I like being able to wet sand with it. And I just like the finish. And, you know, I'm one of those that I started with velvet oil and, you know, same thing.
Get in the lane.
You get in the lane and you stay with it. And I've tried a few other things. I've tried wipe on and things like that. But I like the finish. It's kind of a natural finish. It's not there isn't a buildup on it. And so I like that also. But
Now that's cherry, right?
this is cherry.
So it doesn't look like it's darkened the wood at all.
Well, you know, once it gets in the sun or it oxidizes, it'll darken a little bit.
That's cherry in
Yeah,
general. But
cherry,
the
yeah,
finish doesn't look like it's that much.
right, yeah. So other than that, it's just a matter of, like I said, wet sanding. And let's see, let's be the, yeah.
So are you doing most or all of your sanding on the lathe?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah. And I think I showed you last week, I had this little, what do I want to say? Little cutter that I made. And so I can cut the bottom
Oh,
to
yeah.
finish the bottom.
Yep.
So I can basically sand everything on the lathe. And so that's, I don't want to do that.
So basically what he meant is he's finishing both the inside and the outside, except for his foot. So he does have to go back after cutting
Yeah.
the foot
After I,
and
part
apply
it.
his velvet oil.
right. So I've just sanded with 1200. I'm just going to wipe it off. Wipe the slurry off.
Look, next time we get a overhead shot, look real carefully at the gap between the bowl and the chuck, because he's actually cut it
So that I
to
can,
support his finishing.
right.
See how there's that gap between the foot and the dovetail tenon?
So once I get that finished, then I'm going to go on to 2000. 2000.
So no, you're not reapplying anything, you're just
Right.
continuing.
So when I do the next coat, then I will start with 2000 and then do the 2500 the same way I did this. Now, when I put the first coat on with, and I sand with 600, I don't have to go to the next one. But when I do the second coat, which is would be 1200, I will start with the 6 and do the 12 and then let it sit. So, and again, the key is patience with this finishing. I try to let this sit a couple of days through each coat. And then the last coat, I'm probably letting it sit for a week or so to really dry. And I think I've learned that I get a little better shine if I let it sit for a week. So basically that's what I'm doing there. So let's see here. And I did bring a bowl that's finished there that so I have to leave my bowl on my truck until it's finished. So I convinced my wife that I could buy a couple extra chucks.
I like that. I can make more bowls, honey.
Right. Because they were sitting for a week, you know, basically, to finish the last one. And that's it.
Boy, go to the side view, camera 2. And then when up on the screen, look at how it glossed or it shined up. Looks beautiful.
And that's, so I've got another one to go yet, but that'll be, you know, like in a week. And I suppose I can't get this off. Let's see here. Oh, there it is. Okay.
He should be in a top drawer.
Yeah.
Come on in.
Yeah. Let's see here. Yeah. There you go. Okay.
Beautiful bowl, I drop it.
Won't be the first one.
You know, another option that I've seen, I can't remember which vendor does it now, but they'll make, it might have been Nova or even Vicmark, but they make just a ring that's got the dovetail.
Yes.
So, you know, that could be an option too, like if you mount just the ring to the bowl, and then you could take that bowl off, still use the chuck and just get another ring, because the rings were cheap compared to a new chuck.
Yeah, Nova makes what they call a faceplate ring.
A Nova did that?
Yeah. I just looked at those over at the Workers Depot last weekend.
Okay.
I was actually thinking about buying a couple, making a big disc sander.
Oh, yeah.
So I can,
Sitting in stock. Yes, they did. And that's where I'm going after this.
so I can see that this one even,
Terry's gotta clean up.
this one still bled a little bit after, so, yeah. Maybe we can pass that around.
No, but they're only open until 4 o'clock, and I work out. That's what we're after. I saw that.
So where do you get your velvet oil?
Well, you can get it right from the company in Neenah.
Okay.
And
They have a storefront or you order?
no, you
online?
just have to order it.
Online?
Or you can, if you look online, there are stores hardware stores in
It's just
Wisconsin.
called velvet oil.
Velvet oil, VI, with a VIT at the end, not VET. Yeah.
Woodworkers Depot carry it.
They may have at one time.
I
Have ya?
bought some of their sealer there.
Okay. Yeah.
Woodcraft has it, they use dry water.
They may have too, yeah.
By the way, velvet oil also makes a wood sealer that's kind of the equivalent of anchor seal.
Oh,
It's a little more expensive, but, you know, it's one coat and it does a nice job of sealing. I bought some years ago.
For sealing green wood.
Yeah, yep.
Yeah.
all right.
All right.
Well,
Thanks, Bill.
thank you.
So that's it for the finishes, but I just wanted to remind people that the last time we did this, we threw some documents out on that was loud. Threw some documents out on our website. So there was some handouts. So if you go there, one of the options is handouts, I think it was. Does that sound right? And so what I'll go over real quick here is there's 3 different types of finishes, right? So there's evaporative, means it's going to evaporate in order to cure. And so that would be shellac and lacquer. And the easy way to remember that is shellac and lacquer, once you apply them and what am I? Yeah. It's not the solvent, thank you. The solvent evaporates and then it's hard. But if you apply a new coat of shellac to a base coat of shellac, it softens the base coat and they'll come back together. Also, if you would, in shellac, if you would just put alcohol on it, you can almost wipe it all the way off because it'll re-dissolve. So that's evaporative. Lacquer works the same way. If you use lacquer thinner, it'll actually dissolve the paint or the lacquer. Then there's reactive. So reactive is like a polyurethane. And what happens with the polyurethane is there's at a molecule level, as it's drying, the molecules bind. Oops. So it must be, so on the reactive type, it's more like, but not exactly like an epoxy where you're mixing the hardener and the base, and then it doesn't back out after it's cured. So at the molecular level, it turns into a hard finish and a film. It doesn't matter what you do to it, you got to sand it off and you can't re-soften it. And then there's water-based poly is actually a blend of the two. People think that it's water-based, but water is just a carrier for the water-based poly. So when they say carrier, it just allows it to thin out. Really, you have some type of like an ethanol that's in there that is that reactive part of the finish. So the ethanol allows the water-based poly at a molecular level to bond and create a hard finish. Oil finishes. There's I'm trying to think what we got here. There's one of these papers out there that you could download, and it talks about, you know, like the pros and cons of each of the different oil finishes. Linseed oil, tung oil, wiping varnish, walnut oil. So it's got a couple things like what's the protection level, the sheen, ease of application. And then the third one that's out there is this chart that kind of shows you different characteristics of a finish. How hard is it? How waterproof is it? How easy is it to apply? Does it buff? And those types of things. So you could look at this chart and you could say, you know what, I really want a solvent that's, you know, easy to apply. And so then you find what's easy, and then you find like a 4 or a 5 on this chart, and it's one that's easy to apply. But if you find one that's reversible, or you want to repair it, well, that might be a different type of a finish. And so then you look here, and the 5s, you know, wax is easy to repair. Oil finishes are easy to repair, but varnish is the hardest. So if you went with a traditional varnish, that would be the worst thing if you think you're gonna have to fix it later. So this can be real handy too. And then maybe you'll change what you're using, maybe you won't, but they're out on the, yes, I pulled all of these copies off of our website and printed them. And also Bob Flexner, I thought we had a book of his here, maybe not in the library. Yep, Flexner on finishing. It is a wonderful book if these little details interest you, because he'll talk about all of the attributes of the finishing. He'll get rid of a few of these. He'll debunk some bad information that might be out there. Like tongue oil as an example. Once in a while, you will find at the store a bottle that says 100% pure tongue oil. Once in a while. But 90% of the time, the tongue oil that you buy will say, like the stuff I put in the out on the table today is a tongue oil finish. So it's tongue oil based, but they're putting in a little varnish. They might add a little bit of something else to it, so it's never pure, which is not bad. It's just that you never know what you get, right? So if you have a pure tongue oil, I think that's going to be a little softer. There's reasons why it's probably not as popular as it used to be. But when you get a tongue oil finish, you still don't know, is it mostly tongue oil? Is it 50-50 tongue oil and varnish or what? So that's one of his complaints about the industry, is the labeling that occurs with the manufacturers is inconsistent from one product to another. So buyer beware. Okay? Okay, so the tongue oil, the more coats you put on, the darker it gets if it's pure tongue oil. Yeah, that would make sense. I know Waterlux is really dark. I put it on a couple of light woods, and I immediately, my heart sank because I didn't want them that dark, and I was just like, oh, I just wrecked this wood, but it's nice. Yeah, Bill.
Yeah, when I first started thinking about turning, there was a fellow named Harry Knorr from Mineral Point. He's actually, this was back in the 50s and 60s that he turned. And he became world renowned for his turning. He's done it at such a early stage in turning. And he, when he finished his bowls, he used epoxy.
Oh.
And that was kind of his trademark, to use epoxy. And he said, if you want, you can even throw these things in the dishwasher.
Yeah, and I know Kelly, who's not here today, but I know Kelly promoted, if you had like punky wood, that you had something that was a little spalted, and it was hard for you to get rid of the tear out. He promoted using 2-part like an epoxy, but it's really thin. It's like a paint, and it just gets soaked right in, and it hardens up all the fibers, which would allow you to maybe cut it again, but for sure sand it, and you can get rid of some of that. So epoxy there's a lot of options out there. All right.
So I have a question,
Yeah.
I guess, for anybody. I kind of wanted to make a coffee cup, and we were talking about hot liquids versus crackers. And does anybody do anything like that? That they use a bowl or a coffee cup where there's a hot liquid in it, and what finish would you use, if there's anything, or if you got to do insert?
And anybody make a cup or a vessel that they put water in at all?
I've never made one, but I assume you'd have to use an epoxy probably, because other finishes are going to break down and eventually flake off. But epoxy is probably the way to go.
And you have to be careful with epoxy because they're like, I use limonite in most of their epoxies. Does soften at 170 degrees.
And I did kind of throw out on one of the Facebook forums asking, and I asked about cactus juice, because I do stabilizing. Yeah. And one guy said, yep, you're good to go. And the other guy said, I probably wouldn't, with hot liquids. So,
sure.
Anyway, I was just curious, but maybe it's an insert.
Yeah, yeah. One other thing about epoxy, and I just read this article, and I may have proved it myself by accident, if you use the quick cure epoxy, that will turn yellow quicker and easier in daily to UV rays than a slow setting epoxy. So if you have something that might get sun rays and you were filling in some gaps, just be aware of that. Fast setting epoxy tends to turn yellow and fog easier than slow setting epoxy. And there's all kinds of fast stuff out there. It's harder to find now, the slow set epoxy, unless you go to the big kits that are for river tables and, you know, bar tops and stuff like that. But it's out there.
Does anybody have any experience with the Rubio line of finishes?
A little bit.
Yeah.
I'm real happy with it. I made actually some that charcuterie board I talked about. I put that on there.
Did you use the monocoat or?
Yes. Yep, I used the pure. And that darkens a little bit, but not much. I made some cribbage boards from the kids and at Christmas time, kind of the same process. Very, very easy to use. Really like it.
I heard it's pretty durable too.
I would think so. I mean, you know, they're only a couple months old, but they harden up very nicely.
It's a little expensive.
Yes.
Yeah, well, and actually, you know, the club will do some more of this if you have any requests. So like if that's something that people want to try, we can buy a quart, we'll divvy it up into small bottles and we can put it out on the table. You can sell it too, so.
It's a two-part.
Oh, is it?
Yes.
So, gotcha.
You do mix it up. It's like 2 parts of the resin or the base to 1 part of the hardener.
Gotcha.
You can use it separately, though. Let's say that in instructions. But,
Okay, but we could still get, yeah, we could do 2 bottles together. Yeah. So again, we're open to that. Just drop me a line, tell Ed, you know, mention it to one of the other officers, and we'll see what we can do. Hey, good interaction today. Thanks, everybody. We'll do gallery in a moment.